All right. Welcome back to WMMA Now with your host Chuck Stevenson as always. Today I want to do this is basically kind of like a sequel to a video I did last year, talking about just how bad the matchmaking is over in the Japanese promotions, especially when it comes to the ladies' fights. Uh, this is a little controversial last year. In fact, it brought up some controversy just a few weeks ago. I tweeted this video talking about a bad match being made, and then a professional fighter actually decided to go ahead and insult me. He didn't even watch the video. I just realized that he didn't even watch the video before he complained about it, and he only complained about it because one of the fights I talked about, he had personal connections to both of those fighters. So, whatever. Anyway, it was a fun video for me to make at the time. I think I'm having a fun time with this one, just looking at some of these fights and fighters. But anyway, what I want to get into is just how bad some of these fights are. I mean, it's not that necessarily that the fights themselves are bad. It's just that the matchmaking over there is just terrible sometimes. I mean, you'll have longtime fighters, longtime fight veterans taking on absolute newcomers, like people with less than 3 or 4 fights, and they're taking on, almost 20 fight veterans of the sport that have been doing it for years. And then you got these new fighters, some of whom aren't lifelong martial artists or whatever, and now they're taking on probably the hardest fight they'll ever fight in their career if their career continues after that. Sometimes I've seen a lot of fights on a fighter's record where this fighter has, I don't know, umpteen fights, and then they'll take on an absolute debutante, and then that fighter never fights again. And how can you blame them? They just got the crap beat out of them by, a 20-fight veteran, and they're a newcomer, and they basically just got sold for, whatever, getting paid chump change to get the crap beat out of them. I don't blame them if they don't ever come back. But I want to talk about, before I get into some of the matches and some of the fighters themselves that benefit or don't benefit from this, I want to talk about why, excuse me, the matchmakers do this. Okay, and before I go into this, I got to make a little disclaimer here. Okay, you're going to hear me use the term, you might hear me use the term can crushing, crushing cans, can crusher. I want to make something clear. I'm not calling fighters cans. I'm just using these phrases to make a point that these fights are being set up to give certain fighters a win by facing an easy fight. So why do they make these types of matches? Well, it's mostly to, give certain fighters easy fights. If it's a longtime fighter of the promotion, or if it's someone they're trying to push, one of their stars, someone who helps make money and sell tickets for a promotion, it's to basically give them easy fights to keep them winning and keep them going. Another good reason is, that's not a good reason. There's no good reasons for this. But yeah, that's basically it. And a lot of the time, it is the promotions just not caring about the future of the sport. They're just trying to, sell tickets, make money, just basically keep going in the short term. It's very short-term thinking for the most part, because they're sacrificing young fighters to prop up the veterans and the fighters that they've had for a long time, and they're basically sacrificing the future to keep the present going. It's, excuse me, like I said, it's short-term thinking just to make a few bucks now. Never mind that they're not going to have any future stars or it's going to be even harder to make these future stars because, well, guess what? All your young fighters now have losing records because you keep putting them up against these long-time veterans, these long-time fighters that have been fighting forever and aren't even that great anyway. But oh, they sell tickets, so let's keep them going. All right, and then finally, in order to keep these veterans and these fighters going, they're basically essentially giving them as close to a predetermined fight outcome as possible without actually fixing the fight. Okay? Why risk actually fixing a fight when you can basically just throw the fighter you want to win in against someone who has little to no professional fight experience? It's practically guaranteeing the favored fighter a win. And it doesn't look as bad because it's obviously not predetermined, so you're not going to get accused of fight fixing. So it works out basically for everybody except for, the younger, inexperienced fighter. All right, so now that I've talked about why they do this, I want to talk about some fairly recent matches, or some matches that haven't happened yet but have been made and are happening soon. All right, so the first matchup I want to talk about is probably one that's going to tick off the most people, but I feel it's necessary. We're going to Rizin number 18, just a few months back. The Rizin Super Atomweight Champion Ayaka Hamasaki, 18-2 at the time, took on Suanon Boonsworn, who at the time was 3-1. And now, mind you, this is a champion in a non-title fight. Okay, first of all, I think I've talked before about how much I hate champions being in non-title fights, particularly in their own weight class. So you already have a champion in a non-title fight within their own weight class, but even worse, they're getting what is basically an absolute gimme fight against a fighter who only had 4 total fights. 20-fight veteran taking on a fighter with only 4 fights. How can anybody justify this matchmaking? I don't think you can. And it ended very predictably. Ayaka Hamasaki won in the first round via armbar submission, 3 minutes 29 seconds. This was about as predetermined a fight outcome as you could get without actually fixing the fight. This was some absolutely egregious matchmaking. But it's far from being alone. Moving on. Deep Jewels, 22, December of 2018. I believe this was atomweight fight. Yep, atomweight. Satomi Takano, better known as Sarami, 11-11, took on Yuko Saito, 2-1. So here you have a 22-fight veteran taking on someone who was 2-1 at the time. This is some absolute garbage. I mean, just straight up. That's all there is to it. Moving back over to Rizin. This was, I think, last year. Yep, this was last August. Rizin 12. Kanako Murata, 7-1, taking on Angela Magana at 11-9. Now, this is one where the actually more experienced fighter was being sacrificed to the more inexperienced fighter because the lesser experienced fighter was the favored one, the one they wanted to win. Okay, Murata was already coming off a gimme fight, and then she gets Angela Magana at 11-9. Now, Magana was on a 5-fight losing streak and hadn't picked up a win since 2011. Okay, so 7 years. Oh, that was in August of 2011. So 7 years since she last picked up a win. She's being matched up with a very strong prospect. I mean, come on. Everybody knew what this was about when this fight was booked. I mean, even some of the most ardent Ryzen defenders were like, yeah, yeah. They couldn't justify it. They couldn't defend it. Moving back over to Deep Jewels. Deep Jewels 25. September 1st of this year. So this fight was very recent. This is at flyweight. Shizuka Sugiyama, 17-6-1, taking on Akaringo Asami Nakai, 3-1. So well over 20 fights, taking on a 4-fight veteran. And it ended very predictably. Sugiyama won. Got a submission in the second round. Once again, sacrificing a young up-and-coming fighter who has shown some promise in the ring to someone who has been fighting for years, giving her a pickup after, I believe Sugiyama was coming off a loss. Oh, no, she was coming off a win, had lost before that at New Year's. So, yep, sacrificing another potential prospect to a long-time veteran. And then finally, in specific matchups, this one is coming up at Deep Jewels 26. Yukari, the next month. Yukari Nabe, 6-3-1, taking on Kyujai Prachamwong, who is 0-3. So you have a 10-fight veteran with a well over 500 record, taking on someone who has yet to score a professional win. Come on now. Like, why? Why even bother making this fight? I don't know. I mean, I don't even think Nabe is that popular. I'm not sure. But why would you even why would you take someone with a losing record who hasn't picked up a professional win at all, 0-3? Why would you even put them up against someone with more than a couple fights, let alone 10? That's just irresponsible. That's all I'm going to put it as. It's irresponsible. All right, so that was 5 specific matchups that I wanted to pick out. But now I want to talk about some of Japan's, what I like to call, queens of can crushing. Okay, these are fighters who are constantly getting soft touches or easy fights, or as soon as they lose, what do they get? They get a pick-me-up fight. They get an absolute soft touch to get them back in the win. I mean, it's like as soon as possible, too. They give them easy fights to get them back on another winning streak going. All right. First up is, I like to call her Japan's current top reigning can-crushing queen, Rin Nakai, everybody's favorite muscle bunny fetish girl. Rin Nakai, her whole record is littered with fighters that either have 500 records, sub 500 records, or very few fights at all, well deep into her career. Okay, let's look at her, just her last 3 fights alone. Last 4 fights, really. No, last 5 fights are all against fighters with less than 10 fights, and Rin had well over 10 fights. So she's on a 5-fight win streak right now, dating back to 2016. She hasn't been that active because of contract disputes, but I mean, okay, let's look at her second to last fight. This is the fight I decided to pick out specifically. Eunji Kim at Deep 82nd Impact in February of last year, 2018. Eunji Kim came into this fight with a 1-2 record. So not only was she vastly inexperienced compared to Rin Nakai, she also had a losing record. Could they have made it any clearer that they wanted to give Rin Nakai an easy win? I mean, could it have been any clearer? I don't know. You tell me. So Rin Nakai, the current reigning queen of Japanese can crushing. Next up, another one of these muscle bunny queens is Kanna Watanabe. Now, Watanabe doesn't have that many fights. She's currently 7-0-1. But you look at her last several fights. Take away the 2 wins over Shizuka Sugiyama, and it's crap. I mean, her last fight was against, she was 5-0-1. She was taking on a debutante, Hyun Khan. And, I'm sorry, that was her second to last fight. Her last fight was in Rizin against Justina Zofia Haba, who was 1-0. So a 6-0-1 fighter taking on a 1-0 fighter. But now, you look at who she's facing next month at Deep Jewels 26. Hyun Khan, making her pro debut, as far as I can tell. So you have a fighter with 8 fights total, no defeats, taking on someone who I can't even find an amateur record for her. Gee, I wonder who's going to win. Or I wonder who the matchmakers want to win this fight. Anyway, moving along. King Reina. Now, I talked about her the last time I made one of these videos. Well, she hasn't really gotten any better. Mostly because of Deep Jewels. So, Reina will go to Rizin. And then she'll lose a fight. So then what happens? She picks up 2 wins over debutantes. So, she picked up her first loss New Year's of 2017 against Cindy Dandua. Goes back to Deep Jewels. Takes on 2 debutantes from Korea at Deep Jewels 19 and Deep Jewels 20. Goes back to Rizin. Loses to Caitlin Young. Goes back to Deep Jewels. They give her Judith Reese, who is 4-3. And then Mao Ueda, making her debut. She goes to Rizin. Picks up a loss against Stephanie Egger. So who does Deep Jewels match her up with now? Calkotappa, who, as far as I can tell, has no professional MMA fights. It's like her career plan is mapped out. There's an obvious pattern here. So, this will be what? Her first win. So, she'll get this win in Deep Jewels, probably take on another win in Deep Jewels, and then she'll get to go back to Rizin. And they'll have a hard time matching her up, so they'll put her up against someone who will beat her. It's like, I don't know. If there's a more obvious pattern in a fighter's career, I haven't seen it. All right, next up. Long-time fight veteran. Over 30 fights. Emi Fujino, the Kamikaze Angel. Fujino's getting up there in age. 38 years? 38 years old. But guess what? She's still taking on mostly inexperienced fighters. Just look at her. Look at her most recent fight. She was coming off a loss, so Pam Craze matched her up with Ksenia Guseva, who was 4-0-1 at the time. Fujino's record was 22-11. So over 30 fights, taking on a fighter with 1/6 of the professional experience. Or let's go back a couple years to 2017. Deep 79th Impact. She was 19-10 at the time, Fujino was. She took on Hyunju Baek. Hyunju Baek had 1 fight on her record, a loss. 29 fights, taking on a fighter who was 0-1. Let that sink in. And the win was as predictable as it could be. She won by sleeper choke at 1 minute and 50 seconds of the first round. It's like, it's basically like saying Deep was just going, here, Emmy, here's an easy win for you. And here's your paycheck, too. I mean, what else do you say to something like that? How else can you describe that? It's basically like, they might as well just handed her a check, just for showing up. And then lastly, I want to talk about someone who isn't as experienced, but whose career is being managed very well by the matchmakers. Sayako Fujita, who has fought her career in Gretchen, or all but one of her fights in Gretchen. She now just recently got signed to Pancrase. Okay? She wins her first fight. Or excuse me, loses her first fight. So her next two fights... Now, she's primarily a grappler. So her next two fights are against 2-1 Yuri Shim, which, not bad. Okay? Except when you realize that Shim comes out of a striking-based gym that doesn't even have mats on the floor. So their grappling is very limited there. She won a unanimous decision. Then she took on Shiyu Park, who was 0-1 at the time. Shiyu Park is primarily a striker. So again, a matchup that was set to challenge her a little bit, but basically give her, not challenge her too much, you know? So now she takes on two very good martial artists who have a lot of experience. So who do they match her up with? Jay Che. Jay Che was 2-0 at the time, so the record was similar. However, Jay Che had been fighting, been taking up martial arts for like maybe 2 years at the most, okay? She went into an MMA gym to get in shape and decided to take on fighting. So, yeah, that's what kind of fight that was. Next up, she's 3-1. She takes on Kanna Watanabe, 1-0. Wins that one. Majority decision. So now you get to her first fight in Pancrase. She gets signed to Pancrase. Who do they match her up with? She's 4-1 now. They match her up with a 17-year-old debutante Korean, Ye Rin Hong. It's like, gee. You think they want her to win her first match for the promotion? I'm thinking they really do. I'm thinking they really want her to win. Alright guys, so I gave you 5 examples of specific matches. And then I gave you 5 examples of fighters who constantly seem to benefit from favored matchmaking. Or from the bad matchmaking, rather. I think I made a pretty clear case that the matchmaking in Japan is pretty bad. It's not always bad. Like, there are some good matchups, but man, there is a lot of bad matchmaking going on over there. I think I made my case, but I want to hear from you. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Of course, likes are always appreciated, and hey, what are you waiting for? Subscribe to WMMA Now, the best, fastest growing women's mixed martial arts dedicated platform on YouTube. And hit that bell for notifications. We'll see you next time.